Hey, Katie. Yeah, this is a great question, very timely because a lot of folks are going back to school. This question's from a single mom who looks at a bunch of our content and agrees with the things we have to say about politics and children's rights. But then her kids are in public school and she feels nervous. How do I equip my kids to handle the things they're going to face in public school? Teachers that disagree with them, more, things more aligned with the political left. What's the best way to equip her kids?
Well, this is the right question to be asking because we obviously shouldn't be under any misimpression that the schools are a neutral territory when it comes to a marketplace of ideas, right? Like they might call themselves secular, but that doesn't mean that they're neutral. They may not be religious in the traditional sense, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a worldview that they are pushing on your kids. So you're exactly right to be aware of this and to be prepared to equip your kids to fight the ideological war that they certainly are going to encounter. Well, it's hard to determine like what kind of advice to give you because I don't know how old your kids are. But Stacey Manning and I wrote a book called Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. And it's all about how she and I, with our husbands and our 7 children between us, have been able to send our children almost completely to public schools in one of the wokest cities in the country and have them come out not just with their natural hair color as opposed to like blue or pink or purple, but with a worldview intact that allows them to understand what they believe and why. And in many cases, lead other students to the truth. Now, I wouldn't say that we're sending our children to school, to public school as missionaries, right, to go out and Christianize their world. But I will say that that has been the natural result of well-formed mindset and well-formed faith that has been tested carefully against the ideas that the world is presenting to them. So I'll kind of lay out the basic framework of how to think about this as it relates to the ages of your kids. And then, Jen, I want you to jump in here with some other ideas, maybe that all parents could be thinking about as they send their kids back to school. So we break up our worldview transmission philosophy into 3 different phases, kind of alongside of the classical Christian model of education, the grammar, logic, and rhetoric phase. So in the grammar phase, that's basically elementary school. What are you doing in that phase? That is the developmental stage where kids just soak up everything that they hear from a trusted adult and accept it unquestioningly. So if your kids are in elementary school, you're going to want to filter out a lot of the distortions as much as possible. You're going to want to examine the curriculum. You're going to want to talk to the teacher and say, what is it that you're going to be presenting to my child? And whatever you can opt your kids out of, opt them out of, or put the teacher on notice and say, if you're going to be addressing these kinds of topics, I want you to let me know in advance. Because as much as possible, when it comes to school or media or entertainment, or even conversations with aggressive adults, you want to filter out claims and ideas that are going to interfere with the Christian worldview you're building into your child. So that's the grammar phase. The logic phase is in middle school. That is where there's a developmental shift in a kid's mindset, where they stop unquestioningly accepting every single thing that's given to them. And they start saying, but how do we know that's true? This is the phase. And you're going to see it in your kids. You're going to see them going, but how do you know that Jesus is the only way? But what if socialism really is a great idea? That is when you go, aha, they've entered the next phase of worldview training. This is where you introduce them to all of the distorted ideas that you've been filtering out for the last 10 to 12 years of their life. Now, you are the one that are going to tell them about homosexuality. You are the one that is going to detail the difference between chemical and surgical abortion. You are the one that is going to explain the morality of the free market system. You're the one that is going to give the robust defense of the early explorers like Christopher Columbus and dive into the original materials on that. You are going to make them experts on all the different lies that the world is going to throw at them. And Stacy and I told our kids, you may not know enough to throw down with the teacher and win, but you're going to know enough to spot a lie, and you should be considered the expert among your friend group in all of these different controversial topics. So then in high school, the rhetoric phase, where they learn to speak for themselves. This is where a lot of people are stunned at our approach. And that is, we pull back. We pull back as it relates to, let me tell you the truth. Let me introduce you to these distortions. At that point, it is their job to work out how they want to complete the assignment, what they want to say to their friends. We trust that they've already been exposed to the truth, and they've definitely been exposed to the lies. So you pull back in terms of equipping and training, but you double down on emotional connection. You lean in, you increase as much as possible your time spent with them and the emotional intimacy that you create with them by listening to what is happening in their world. So there's a lot more details about that in raising conservative kids in a woke city. There's different tactics that you need to take based on their ages, but I would say not based on whether you're in a red state or a blue state, public schooled, homeschooled, or private schooled. The world is coming for your kids, no matter where you're raising them and what kind of schooling you've chosen. And it's your job to make sure that they are equipped.
Mhm. I think it's called the founder's principle, is something you talk about. Basically, the first person to introduce something is often looked at as the expert on it. And I think we actually have a huge advantage now in 2025. There are really not a lot of new ideas popping up. Parents or people who work with kids can really try to stay on top of some of these news things or Twitter and the language that pops up, and you can be the ones that introduce those things in an age appropriate way to your kids. But I think when we consider sort of insidious progressive ideology, so some of these folks in public school, these young teachers, they just got brainwashed in college, right? So they're coming out of college and they're like, actually, this is the best way to love people, is rainbows and affirmation, and let people cut off their body parts because that's who they truly are. And a woman is just someone who identifies as a woman, right? They obviously haven't thought it through. And they think they're helping, or, I'm going to be the one who introduces these concepts and like breaks your kids out of these patriarchal structures they've been trapped and oppressed in. But the thing is, they're going to meet your kids and your kids are going to say, oh, I know all about gender transition, but it's not physically possible that a man can become a woman, right? When their teacher tries to introduce them that concept, they're already going back to the founder who already told me everything about that. And now they're questioning the person who's inserting an idea that's nonsensical, right? So I've loved that you guys have talked about be the first person to introduce it. There's age appropriate ways. When you have a little kid and you're walking behind a man dressed as a woman, you probably have to be careful how and when you do it, in terms of you don't want to hurt. You don't need to be rude to a person you're walking right by. But to get back in the car and say, oh, that's kind of strange, that man was dressed as a woman, he's confused. It can be that simple. You don't have to go into, well, people have gender identity issues and cut off their body parts when they're little.
Yep. And we talk a lot about that. The grammar phase is not the phase to never allow them to see any portion of reality. What you're going to emphasize in those elementary school years is the good, true, and beautiful. And what's true is sometimes you're walking behind a man who's wearing a dress, and your kids are going to have questions about that. And then you're going to say, that was confusing, wasn't it? Because we are made to have the external expressions reflect our bodily reality. We are made to dress like women and dress like men. And there's something wonderful and beautiful about that. And it's sad when somebody rejects their body to the point where they're not reflecting their maleness or femaleness in the way that they're dressed. We can pray for them, but we also know it's not right. We should love our given bodies. We should love our physical bodies. It means that when they are, if we're not keeping out the badness of the world, when they have questions about the Holocaust or slavery, we tell them the truth about it. What we're doing is we're keeping out distortions of reality. We're keeping out glamorized violence. We're keeping out warped history. We're not shielding them from depictions of the human body. I remember when my girls were little, we would take them to play dates, a lot of times at the lake, with a lot of different women wearing bathing suits, a lot of different moms with a lot of different body shapes. I wasn't saying you're not allowed to look at those body shapes, but I wasn't going to allow them to look at images of airbrushed women or anything that would, like, we didn't have Barbies, because I was like, that's not what a real life woman looks like. I want them to have a lot of exposure to the real thing. And then by the time they got into middle school and, they were exposed certainly by their classmates, we could talk about those distortions. Why is it that some women are making the choices that they're making in terms of their body or presenting their body in certain ways? And we kind of got into the pornification of culture, but they already knew the truth. And so then when we introduced the distortion, they had something to measure it against.